Yeah, thanks, Siavash, for the invitation to share a little bit about my research today. As is protocol, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that I'm on today. So I'm on Yuggarapu country. I'm actually at home today, and also acknowledge my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who've tuned in today, and happy NAIDOC week. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about the artwork you can see on the background of my screen. So I work at the University of Queensland. We recently launched a reconciliation action plan, and we engaged two amazing Quandamooka artists, Casey Coolwell and Kayla Mangtalo, to develop this beautiful artwork. So I encourage you to have a look at the story behind the artwork. And so I'd just like to talk a little bit about who I am before I get started. So my mob's from Daly River in the Northern Territory through my mum, so Wagaman country, and also strong Scottish with a little bit of English ancestry thrown in on dad's side. But I was born in Brisbane, raised in southeast Queensland, and very much connected to communities around southeast Queensland, particularly up on the Sunshine Coast where mum still lives. So that's who I am. What I do, I'm currently a senior lecturer, senior research fellow at the University of Queensland. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Education, senior research fellow in the Centre for Policy Futures. But I do have a youth work background. I was formerly a youth support coordinator back in the day. And and I also was a teacher in flexi school. So I worked at the flexi school up on the Sunshine Coast and in Logan, so the Centre Education Program, and Anala Flexi. So I'm just going to explore a little bit, what can flexi school research tell us about how to support young people to re-engage in education? And the short answer is a lot. There's a lot of research on mainstream school engagement and re-engagement of young people, but there's not a lot of research in general on flexi schools. So it's really an opportunity to look at the problem of mainstream disengagement of young people in a different way. My research has focused primarily on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education in flexi schools, mostly because of who I am. But I think it's really important to have that emphasis when you look at the numbers of Indigenous young people who are engaging with flexi schools, and conversely who are disengaging from mainstream settings. So obviously there's not a lot of time for me to go over the field broadly, but I'm just going to touch on a few key studies and also really just share some key findings from some of the research study that I've done specifically on Indigenous education and flexi schools. So this typology was developed by one of the key scholars in the field, Kitty Tarila, back in 2007, when research was sort of catching up with what are these flexi schools and what do they look like. And the typology is really helpful for understanding what sort of educational options are available to young people who've been pushed out of mainstream education settings or disenfranchised. So on one side, you have stable schools or more permanent options for young people. And on the other side, you've got what was termed unstable, but really what is meant is short-term options. So on the other side of the typology is whether the focus of change is around changing the young person to meet the needs of an education system, or is it changing educational provision to meet the needs of young people? So before I talk about my research, it's important to situate it around this typology. So I've really been interested in longer term options that have changed educational provision to meet the needs of young people. And as an Aboriginal educator, I found that I was in my element because I was able to adapt the way that I would develop curriculum, the way that I would work with community to meet the needs of young people. And in the schools that I worked in, there were high numbers of Murri young people in those schools. So that really worked well. Back in 2015, I published a paper with a colleague about what I found to be the key themes in the literature at that time. And there was really three key distinct findings that kept coming up from different studies in Australia on flexi schools. So the first was really that flexi schools have an emphasis on community and a sense of belonging. And when I talk about community, I'm talking about internal community at the school, but also that engagement with external community. They also have an emphasis on relationships. So relationships with young people, relationships with community, relationships between staff, and finally, an empowerment of young people. And what I mean by that is really centering the voices of young people in their education experience. So that means having a say on what curriculum is written, having a say on, you know, their educational goals and how they're met, having a say on what their school day looks like. A really significant piece of research is by my good colleagues, Martin Mills and Glenda McGregor, and this was done in partnership with YANQ, and I encourage you to have a good read of this report. It's a really significant report, particularly when you're looking at Queensland. So some of the key findings from this really, I guess, supported the themes that I'd come up with earlier around focusing meeting what they called material supports. So that's providing things like food, shelter, clothing, legal representation, and childcare when supporting young people with re-engaging in education. School environment, so that's, you know, being young person centered, flexible, relational. The adjustment of pedagogical practices, so that's, you know, how you're teaching. It's just a flash word for the way you teach. Strong community connections with local organisations, grassroots community and local businesses. And within the key findings was an evidence of growing demand. And what I'm interested in talking to you, as I know a lot of you are practitioners today, is, you know, since COVID, has that demand grown? And from what I'm hearing from my colleagues in flexi schools, it has. There was a recognition within this report about the gap in research around outcomes for young people who attend. We do know from the research so far that there are some short-term tangible outcomes, but we don't really know long-term where young people who attend flexi schools end up, what their long-term outcomes are. So that's a piece of research that really needs to happen. So some of the key findings from my master's and doctoral studies, I obviously can't go through all of it. These are just very short summaries, but the demographic data that I was able to get through my master's study that was really focused on looking at how leaders are doing Indigenous education supported that there was very high engagement of Indigenous people in flexi schools. So when I started out, believe it or not, there was no published evidence of the high engagement of Indigenous people with flexi schools. So I knew it from my, you know, from my practice and being connected to, you know, my colleagues still in flexi schools, but there wasn't really anything published around it. It had been mentioned in various research or various reports, fairly absent in policy at that stage. But what I was able to get, and I know it was a small sample, but I was able to publish some findings that supported that, yes, there is high engagement of our people with the flexi school sector. So in the 9 schools on that study, there were there was about 31% enrolment of young people and about 30% of staff. And those numbers obviously change regularly. So that's something I think that needs to be monitored and published fairly transparently. The other finding that came from this was that while flexi school leaders talked about being committed to Indigenous education, being really committed to self-directed learning in and around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education, their reporting on how they practiced Indigenous education didn't really support that there was robust practices around that at that point in time. And I have published some findings on that. Whoops. Okay. So my PhD study took a bit of a shift. So what I wanted to do with my PhD was really centre the voices of our people in this. So like mainstream schools, in flexi schools, the majority of school leaders are non-Indigenous. And what worried me a little bit was that, you know, you have such high numbers of Indigenous young people engaging with the sector, high numbers of staff, and yet we weren't hearing from our people around what was happening in that space. So some of the key findings from that study included that Indigenous staff are undertaking complex and important roles in flexi schools. And it's through the employment of Indigenous staff, flexi schools then acquire much needed local cultural knowledge and cultural capital to support those high numbers of Indigenous students. And what I've been advocating for in you know, roles that I undertake outside of my role as a researcher is moving towards recognising that level of cultural capital and cultural knowledge that Indigenous workers bring inherently to those roles. And it's often unrecognised. There were issues with race and racism present in flexi schools, although participants in this study reported much lower incidence in comparison with studies of Indigenous staff in mainstream schools. There's been a number of national studies about the experiences of Indigenous educators, whether they're qualified teachers or in more supportive educational roles. In mainstream settings, they are reporting very high levels of racism, burnout, instability in employment. In my study, which was across 3 different states in flexi schools, although it was still an issue in some instances, it wasn't reported to be as high. The biggest concern expressed by Indigenous flexi school staff in this study was that there was an over-reliance on cultural activities or celebrations when embedding Indigenous knowledges and perspectives across all areas of the school curriculum. And that's a really common problem that's coming out more broadly in the literature on Indigenous education. So after doing those years of study, I was thinking about ways of engaging policymakers and practitioners and the community more broadly around this issue. And not being a Twitter user or social media person, I talked to a colleague and they suggested looking at the conversation as a media outlet because, you know, they're really focused on publishing more research-based work, and that's, you know, I wanted the conversation to be evidence-based and really policy-focused. So I worked with my colleague, Jo Lampert, and we wrote an article that combined a lot of the research I'd done to date. And so not just my master's and PhD study, but some other studies as well. And the key points we made in this article was that there is an increasing evidence of high numbers of Indigenous young people enrolling in flexi schools. There appears to be high numbers of Indigenous staff engaged in various educative roles in flexi schools. The youth-centred approach and inquiry-led curriculum appears to be engaging high numbers of Indigenous young people, but there's no studies that examine the short-term or long-term outcomes for Indigenous young people that are engaged in flexi school settings, and we think that's a problem. And Indigenous education policy has overlooked the role of flexi schools in addressing the closing the gap policy imperatives to date. So we put that out there and we had a really strong response to the article. It's been read, I think, almost 9,000 times now. I had lots of engagement from the research sector, from the policy sector, and just the general public wanted to know more about it. I think I did an interview with a breakfast show in South Australia. It was a really random email asking if I'd just come on and have a yarn about what these flexi schools are and what they mean for Indigenous communities. So there has been a lot of interest in the topic. And I'm continuing to have those conversations in advising roles that I have. And the big questions that I'm taking moving forward are, you know, how can we take the learnings from flexi school approaches to continue to improve provision of education in mainstream settings? So do we just keep opening up flexi schools? Is this something we want to do as an education sector? And what is the role of flexi schools longer term? These are really big questions that I don't think can be answered without further building of evidence and research that centres the voices of you know, young people first and foremost, but also practitioners in the school and communities. I do have some free access articles, and Siavash, I'm happy to share my PowerPoint today if anyone's interested in it. It's got the links to those articles. Something that concerns me as a researcher is, you know, we do all this research and we publish it in journals, and then people can't access them unless you have a membership with a university library. So I try and do what we call non-traditional research outputs, so they're accessible to people. But yeah, if you want more detailed articles, just email me. I'm quite happy to share articles if you're interested in them. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Marnee. Greatly appreciate that. And also greatly appreciate you sharing those links. And yeah, so if you're happy, I'll put that on our website where there was more information about this forum. And yeah, or you, if there's anything else you want to send, we'll share that as well. So people keep an eye out, and I will be sharing those with us. Thanks again, Marnee. So if you could now unshare your screen. Awesome. Thank you. So I now like to introduce to you our next speaker, who is Michelle Kinane. Michelle has worked with young people for over 20 years within the Edmund Rice Education Australia. Her current role is working with 6 principals and 22 schools across Australia. Edmund Rice Flexi School works with disenfranchised youth to re-engage them with education using operation by principle and trauma-informed practice, which empowers young people's voice and agency. Michelle, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, all your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone, and thanks for the invitation to present at this forum, Siavash. Really appreciate it. And I want to acknowledge and pay respects to the Turrbal and Yagara people, past, present and emerging leaders. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the work that Dr. Marnee Shay has done in terms of the space around flexible learning and the research into, particularly around our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. And I think that image that she presented around, you know, that triangle around community, sense of belonging, empowerment of young people and focus on relationships is really at the heart of the work that we do in Flexis. And I also think that the 2 questions that Marnee finished with are really big questions that, you know, hopefully at some point will get addressed, you know, nationally, because, you know, they do need to be, you know, they're great questions and we need to start working towards, I guess, some solutions or answers to both of those. So thanks, Marnee. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see how we go. Okay. Oops. Is that working, everyone? Okay. Is that working for everyone?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. I've used lots of Teams, but not a lot of Zoom before, so I just wanted to make sure that I was doing it correctly. Okay, so I know I'm talking to a room full of very experienced practitioners and who any number of you could be doing this presentation today. I want to acknowledge that 2020 has been a very strange year and one where all of us that work with vulnerable young people have probably seen disengagement at its highest levels. I can only talk to you about my experiences, and I hope that one or two things resonate with you today. So who am I and what's my lens? So I has already talked about the fact that I work with Edmund Rice Education Australia, and we work with operation by principles and common ground, and those 4 principles are safe and legal, honesty, respect, and partnership. So we're not rules-based. Young people don't wear uniforms, they don't pay fees. It's all based on relationships, and it's really about building a sense of a young person's confidence. So I'm going to talk about how we engage our young people.
Michelle, could you remove those next slides that are there so that
okay. Sorry. If I just do make a difference, let's just see all slides. Sorry, having not used Zoom before, that's not helpful, is it? But now you're seeing everything. Sorry, everyone. Does anyone have any clues on what I'm display settings? Hold on.
It's somehow got to remove that next slide.
Is that working better now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you. That's
better. Okay, great. All right, cool. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to start with, the young people that are really highly disengaged, those young people that, in your community or your schools that you give a call to, haven't been at school for ages and keep promising, to come in, but they won't. And I guess the big thing that I've learned over the years with the staff team is that we can't wait for young people to come to us. We need to go to them. And what does that look like? That could look like home visits, parcels of food, sitting in conversation with young people and family, carers, meeting at McDonald's or any other food outlet, because food is a massive connector for our young people. And we know that often meeting those initial needs around food is really important. The focus of those is always around wellbeing and support, building up trust. And you need to take, what we've learned is you take this slowly, and it's small steps. It might happen once a week or twice a week. But I guess the big part of it is really what we're trying to do is find out what is a young person's unmet need, and really getting to the heart of what's blocking them or stopping them from being able to come to school in the very first place. So these are young people who just aren't even, they've enrolled or they've talked about coming to school, but they're just not coming. So I think the big part is, what's their unmet need? Is it the transport? Is it a different start or finish times? Is it their anxiety or the concern for what will happen at home if they do go, because they're worried about their parents or siblings? And once we listen and we have the young person's need on the table, then the next step is that we can collaborate to work on a solution together. And that really is at the heart of the work that we do in Flexis. And we refer to this as collaborative problem solving. And it's a model that was designed by a gentleman called Stuart Ablon. And I've put a resource to his video, which is a great video there for you to have a look at. And it's an organisation called thinkkids.org. And really, that really gets to the heart of common ground. I guess the big part is your school or community needs to develop systems and processes to be able to reach out to young people in order for that to be part of your day. Your practice framework is to be able to go out to meet young people in those spaces. I think something that's really been a challenge this year is that COVID. And some of our young people have actually thrived, like a small percentage across Australia have really thrived with being able to work from home. Those young people who are carers for their family, have their own children, or have got significant mental health needs, the online learning for some of our young people, not many, but was a really positive outcome. And I think in Queensland, it doesn't meet our school registration guidelines. And I think it's something we need to continue to push, on the agenda around ensuring that we are capturing this group. So if we're talking about engaging young people, I think it's something we need to continue to voice to make happen for those young people, because it is a valid engagement method, which is really beneficial for some young people. Sadly, at the end of the day, sometimes we can't engage some young people. They just will not attend our schools or our communities. And sometimes, and I say this as a very last resort, sometimes we have to say goodbye to them. And often this is the vehicle for young people choosing to re-engage with us, which is really important. But when I say that we let them go, it's not that. It's we check in at 1 month to check on their wellbeing, at 3 months, at 6 months. And what's important is that young people know the door is open and they can come back. We can continue to connect in regarding their wellbeing, and that we work to establish agencies or schools to support the family and the young person's needs. So that, you know, sadly, that's a reality for those really challenging young people, and it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally it does. And I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. So how do we engage the young people who do come to our schools and communities, and what's the key to keeping them engaged? Look, I think the number one thing is visually make your school or community a safe space. You know, young people need to be able to feel that from the minute they walk in there, that it's going to be a place where they can be themselves. Colours and images make places feel welcoming. You can see from the image that I've included that that's our art space. It needs to be culturally safe. Local language and images, you know, the maps of the languages. You know, they need to know that we're working with elders to develop RAPs or, you know, Indigenous education strategies. A large group of young people that are engaging in flexi schools are gender fluid or LGBTIQ T plus, I should say. Having things like the rainbow flag visually is another way of saying you're welcome and come as you are, you're accepted, we value you. Again, mental health, posters, you know, for us, our 4 principles are everywhere, you know, in terms of young people understanding what the buy-in is and what we're expecting from them. And the other part of that is, you know, our trauma-informed practice framework. For us in Queensland schools, we use Reboot, but in our southern schools, we use Berry Street. So again, that trauma-informed practice, and in the back of the art classroom, you can see it the very farthest in faces, but I'll show those to you. So we're really sort of showing young people what it is that we value, and really trying to engage them and get them to buy in straight away into our community and who we are. So in terms of that, I guess that triangle that Marnee, that diagram that Marnee talked about, it's really that community and sense of belonging that we're trying to establish visually. The second part fits into that focus on relationships, and know the young people and know their story. And I can't say that strongly enough. They won't engage in learning unless we've got relationships happening. Greeting by name and bumping elbows these days, being COVID. You know, we used to shake hands, but not anymore. Showing unconditional positive regard and being there for young people without judgment. And I think what we do and say matters. And that requires deliberate staff PD and practice meetings with scenarios, because under pressure, when a young person's escalating, staff need to know what to do. And as a site, we need to be consistent and predictable in our approach. And this is what makes young people feel safe. And then they'll start to engage in learning. The other important part is that we acknowledge from enrolment that young people are the expert in their own lives, and that we're here to support and guide them. And this seems like a really simple thing, but it really empowers a young person greatly. And I think they can finally see when we start to do that, that there is a difference by coming to a flexible learning centre. The third area is having a really robust induction program. So what we found over the years is when we were enrolling young people, our engagement increased significantly if we had a really robust induction program. And that was really about explaining to young people that there's a reason for the way that you weren't engaging with school previously, and learning about how the brain works, and really explicitly teaching them about it's okay, your wild brain's had a lot of exercise, you've been in a lot of trauma. Now what we want to do is work with you on how to get you to the smart brain. You know, and also the induction program is a really good place where we can demonstrate who we say we are. So if we say that, you know, respect is at the cornerstone of it, then that has to be evident in the way that we're inclusive, we're using gender neutral language, and we've got culturally safe resources. For us, participation is another thing that we talk about. So have lunch together, build in brain breaks, allow young people to participate in a variety of ways, and acknowledge that it's okay not to participate yet. That's a really big part of what we do when we're first working with young people, is we allow them time and space to get to know us, to learn how we will operate, and to slowly invite them in. I think setting high expectations is really important as well. Like, I think that initially when young people come to our schools and there's no rules, they think, oh, okay, it's just a drop-in centre, I can come and go whenever I want. So it's really about setting the expectation that we are a school and that we have accredited and non-accredited learning, but we do it differently. We have a lot of young person voice. Young people get to choose their timetable, negotiate their learning. And I think a really powerful thing, or buy-in, is when you ask young people what they've always wanted to learn or know about and build this into their timetable. The other part is really explaining that home visits. So if we don't hear from young people, during the week, there's no phone calls, there's no texts, there's no communication, then we go out and do home visits. And that's really important, because then the young people know that we're really establishing that relationship and the fact that we have a genuine care for them. We establish wellbeing plans, from the very beginning. Who can a young person go to? What helps them to de-escalate? And we do that in a visual way. And I've got one that I'll show you in a second. Very early on, we sit with a young person, the family, the carers, as soon as possible, and we create personal learning plans where we help them to develop goals. And those goals can be as simply as, I want to come to school. I haven't been to school for a long time. I want to come for an hour a day or 2 hours a day, or I want to stop smoking as much, or I really want to challenge myself to get some work, or I really do want to graduate the school, be the first person in my family to graduate year 12. So they're all the things that we do to start engaging with young people. So I've got a bit of a visual of the wellbeing plan that we use, and it's a bit of a simple graphic, because we've got, in one of our schools, we've got year 5s to year 12s, but most of our schools across Australia, we've got year 7s to year 12s. And often they've got language deficits, or communication is not as strong. And so we start with something really simple. And we really want to start with this image because we like the idea of who are the 3 staff that you can go to. The blessings are around getting young people to acknowledge who they're grateful for having in their life. The clouds around the boat are, what are 3 ways that you can de-escalate? What happens when you get angry? Is it listening to music? Do you need to go for a walk? Do you want to get a drink of water? Because young people's go-to often is, well, I want to have a cigarette. So how do we get them to think about other ways of de-escalating? What's their focus for the term? It might be coming to school, it might be making friends. And then what's something that they'd be really proud of achieving, in the first couple of weeks or term. The other way we do it is we really look at having a wellbeing tracker. So having a way of collecting data on where young people are. Is that link coming up for everyone? Is that good?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And so we developed a tool because we really wanted to talk to young people and really sort of gather some data on how they were travelling. So, we created a little video. I won't play it for you. I'll do a very quick skim over it, a little video about what it is. Obviously, we do a blurb at the beginning around child protection and safeguarding. And we're really sort of getting young people to start thinking about their sleep, are there areas that they've got concerned about? Do they feel safe? And while collecting this data is important, the most important part is having the conversation and the follow-up with a young person. That's the most important part. So let's go.
Michelle, sorry, interrupting. Siavash
Yep.
here. Could you try that link again, please?
Oh, it's not working?
No.
Okay. Is that...
Someone suggesting you have to stop and reshare the new screen for people to see.
Okay. So stop share?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Right. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Let me know if that's... Is that better?
Yeah, young people wellbeing tracker, yes.
Yep, great. Okay, so as I said, it's just a tool that we developed because we wanted to get some data on where young people were at, and we wanted to keep having conversations with them around, you know, sleep hygiene and their safety, and do they need any, you know, support? Was there any bullying in our community? What were some of their concerns? So it's just a way of collecting data. But as I said before, the important part of that was really around the conversation and the follow-up that happened from that. I'm just going to stop share again and I'll just head back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Allowing me. Are you back on the, oh, there we go. Okay, the fourth area is really building in student voice. You know, in our communities, morning meetings are really important. So some schools will have them every day, others will have them a couple of times a week, and pastoral care groups. But the important part is that they're led by young people. And it's where all young people and staff sit in a circle in a morning meeting. We talk about what's happening in the world, as well as what are the issues at school. And that's really important to give young people an opportunity to talk about issues that are important to them. We celebrate the good things. Shout outs are encouraged around young people that have really demonstrated working with the principles, you know, respect or honesty, participation or being safe and legal. We acknowledge birthdays, academic success, young people doing work experience or traineeships. So it's really a place where we bring our community together as one. We sit in a circle so that we are all as one and we're having power with, not power over. And we're really celebrating the successes of young people. One of the things that we do is we add into that ritual the check-in, the 1 to 5. And that's a really important process. So it's like a bit of a hands up, who's a 1, who's a 5. And it's an important process because then staff can identify and other young people can identify who's a 1, what young people need extra support that day. And we want to grab them before they go off to learning so that we can see if we can assist them. It's also teaching our young people empathy so that they can look around the room and understand where other people are at, which I think is a really important skill with our young people. We then ask them to do a physical hands up, or, you know, some schools will ask, do you have a pen? And that's their symbol that they're ready to engage with our school and with the 4 principles and therefore learning. And that's really important because we're asking young people to really buy into their day and tell us that they're ready to engage. And if they're not ready to engage, that's okay as well. We've got lots of support with our youth workers or heads of campus, associate heads of campus that can work with a young person to help them to resolve whatever's happening for them that day.
Michelle,
Yeah.
a couple of minutes, if you could please keep it to a couple of minutes. Cheers.
Yep, sure. Okay. So what I might do is I'll just skip through this. We capitalise on young people's interests and make their learning fit their learning framework. So, you know, we use project-based learning is really important. When developing a curriculum, we start with what are the young people interested in? What are the attributes we want young people to leave with? And then how do we build around the general capabilities, 21st century skills across curriculum priorities? An area of growth for us that we're looking at is how do we report on young people learning? We're exploring developing learner profiles that capture the skills of young people in our community. Because, you know, we've got a high percentage of First Nations young people in our schools, and yet I'm not sure we actually acknowledge in any report around their cultural awareness and capacity in our schools. In our Queensland flexis, we've identified 11 sort of human capabilities that we'd like to look at, and that's a little diagram of those. And how we would do that, if you've read the Beyond the ATAR report, we like to sort of want to capture all that rich sort of accredited learning, but we also want to look at the skills that young people are getting through enterprise skills, through their empathy, through, you know, the wellbeing and care of others. So I was going to show a video, but I think I'm out of time. So that PowerPoint will be shared with you. And I guess that's the voices of the young people around how they see that, you know, how we're creating schools in which they want to engage with. So I'll leave you with the voices of the young people to explore at your own time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michelle. And we will, definitely share your slides and that link as well, so everybody would get the chance to watch it. Thanks again. I'd like to now introduce you Lisa Love, our final speaker. Lisa's 20 years of education and training policy implementation and stakeholder engagement experience. She has led senior national negotiations around school funding and other complex education and training matters, implemented the National Quality Framework for Early Childhood Education and Care, managed legislative changes, and played an instrumental role in leading strategic state education and training policy platforms, such as the Queensland's Skills Plan, Master's Review of the Early Childhood Workforce Action Plan. Her current passion as Director of Youth Engagement Project in Queensland Department of Education since 2017 is preventing and supporting young people disengaging from education and ensuring that every young person has equal opportunity for success. I'll pass it on to you, Lisa. Please go ahead.
And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that that I'm on today, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to say thank you to Michelle for her presentation. That was lovely. Hearing your commitment to connection with young people and your commitment to high expectations for young people is fantastic. So that was lovely to hear. Thank you. And Marnee, we've been reading your research since back when this project started. So it's absolutely wonderful to have you here today. So thank you very much. I guess the Youth Engagement Project, we've been quietly beavering away at this project since about 2017, and the research, as I said, Marnie's research, the work of Martin Mills and Glenda McGregor, Kitty Terrell, all of those have been instrumental in the research base that informed the work that we're doing. Our work is vast in its reach. We are looking at all mainstream school settings as well as alternative education settings such as flexi schools. And we're also looking at what are the gaps in the system and what are the pieces of the system that we need to support young people. So I've got a few things to cover off today, one of which you're all familiar with, the hearts and minds side of this, but why is youth engagement in education a priority and why is it a priority for government? Then I'll run through as quickly as I can in the biggest picture, what is the Youth Engagement Project and all of the moving parts of that. But then I really want to spend some time talking about some specific initiatives within the project that you might be interested in if you haven't heard of them as yet. So I'll leap right in. This was no surprise to you, but we have too many young people slipping through the mainstream system. We all know that the educational outcomes that you can attain during your schooling can be the difference between succeeding and not in your later life. We know the transformative nature of education for those that come from difficult backgrounds and the challenges that they can experience along the way in trying to attain that. And so way back when the education and training reforms for the future started at the turn of the millennium, there was that commitment to supporting young people to be earning or learning. And earlier this decade, some work was done and we could see that they're still slipping through. That commitment is still there and government still wants to support every young person to succeed in their education and attain something that will set them up for lifetime prosperity. So we started the Youth Engagement Project and looking through all of that research that I was talking about before and so much more, we set up a policy frame, which was three ends to it. There's supporting students to stay at school, which we know that's where we need to focus most of our efforts. So making sure that schools are a place that young people can stay and making sure that the systems and supports are in place to help young people to attain their education through schooling. We also were aware that there wasn't anything there if they slipped through the cracks. We needed a system that caught them, found them, and helped to connect them back to education, training or employment pathways in partnership with the many, many agencies that are working in that space. But the other piece that we identified was for those that leave year 12 and don't go on to achieve success, and trying to make sure that there was a safety net there for those young people as well. So under those 3 platforms, we've got a range of initiatives just summarised there, and the little note at the bottom there, these commitments are part of the Advancing Queensland Priorities of government and part of the Our Future State commitment, which committed to 91% of young people participating in education, training or employment by 2022, which now, given the impacts of COVID, has become more ambitious than ever before. So I've got, we've got a YouTube channel, as daggy as it is for the Education Department to have a YouTube channel, we do. And within it, there's a youth engagement channel, which I encourage you to take a look at. I wanted to just play for you a quick 30-second snippet of some of our principals talking from one of those YouTube videos, just to give you a reminder of some of the great things that are happening out there, that we are achieving great things for lots of young people, and many of our principals and tens of thousands of our teachers are really committed to trying to keep young people in mainstream schools every day. Oh, I've got an error, Siavash.
I think that's to do with your YouTube's, not this end.
I'll have a look.
Refresh it, please. Somebody is, Lisa, saying that YouTube is down at the moment.
Oh, right. Well, then we'll be able to share the link and you can have a look in your own time. Amazing that YouTube's down. All right. Well, we'll keep going on. So one of the key initiatives that we've been working through and piloting in a number of schools is a thing called a FlexiSpace. It's not a flexi school, I want to assure you. It is not anything like a flexi school. What it is an initiative that enables us to work within a school to identify how they can embed inclusive practice for young people that are at risk of disengaging from school across the entire school. There's a physical space that's used to identify a specific cohort of young people who may be at risk of leaving school, and teachers within the school work with those young people to work through what are the strategies that work for that young person to help them engage with the curriculum, and then those teachers work across the school to make sure that those practices are embedded in how that young person engages with school and across the entire school. It's very much embedded in a philosophy of inclusivity and making sure that young people continue to be part of a mainstream school setting. I'm going to try this little YouTube thing here again, but if we get an error, then we know that YouTube's going to continue to be down. Nope. Okay, we'll move on. These are the current locations and those that are coming on board next year. And then we have a further 20 coming on board the year after that. So total of 52 sites by 2022 is what we're currently working on. So a smattering across the state. They are not intended to be, the program is not designed for young people to be brought into the school for those. It's about catering to the students that are already there. It's very clear within the policy guidelines to make sure that this is not a strategy about moving young people. It's about making sure that the school operates in an inclusive way. And then we have a digital engagement strategy. So a lot of the research that we did at the outset of the project identified that young people don't have access to information about their options. They don't feel empowered in their education. They feel like it's something that's being done to them. And we wanted to make sure that there was an information platform that spoke to young people from a youth voice in the space. We also identified that parents, for a lot of young people, not those at the most vulnerable end, but for many young people, parents are a key influencer, particularly for those that are at risk of disengagement, and that parents feel lost in the information space. They don't know where to look. They weren't aware of the department's website or the information on it, and when they were, found it difficult to engage with. So we designed the Spark Their Future site as well to cater for those audiences. So we're having some success. The sites went live this year. The youth site is having great success and above industry performance. You ask a young person to engage with a website about education information, I'm sure they're going to roll their eyes. So we're pleasantly surprised at the engagement that's happened, but one of the key things that we've been hoping with the site is that it also speaks to youth workers and provides an avenue for youth workers to be able to engage with the content, the difficult content around what is the options and expectations around education participation, and provides a tool for youth workers that want to have conversations with young people that's in a tone that's suitable for them. I'm going to try again this video, but we'll probably get the error again. Yeah. And the parent site. It's very different in tone to the youth site. It speaks to parents, got an authoritative tone. It's been highly successful in its access so far, and we've got a number of experts that have partnered with us in providing video material for parents. We've got Maggie Dent and Nathan, and hopefully some others that will get up online next year. Experts in the fields around parenting and supporting young people through the difficult teenage years, with a focus on how you can support them to keep engaged in education. Again, hopefully useful information in there for youth workers and those working with young people as well. So then we've got our piece, which is around working with the alternative education sector. So a couple of years back, our Director General, along with the heads of ISQ and QCEC, partnered together in a commitment to alternative education, and many of you have probably seen that. This year, what we've put up online is a practice framework to help provide additional information. When we developed the commitment to alternative education, the discussions with the principals from many of the alternative settings that we were working with identified that they needed to see something that could provide some tangible ideas of how this would work in practice. So the practice framework has gone up there as a tool to support and help schools in understanding how it might look in practice. And we've also got a couple of fact sheets that are starting to go up online from our 10 spotlight schools. So 10 alternative settings were provided with the Spotlight Schools grant this year to help them focus on these practices. Now, these are not standards, they're not mandated, anything like that. This is about what the sector talked to us about, what they considered to be high quality practice within alternative education settings. It's not surprising, and it's not anything different to what Michelle was talking about in terms of having high expectations and providing broad opportunities for young people and providing them with the opportunities to participate in the same experiences and opportunities that they would get if they were in any other settings. So the full document is there at that web link, and there's other supporting information on the site that sits around that. And then we've got so in terms of catching them when we fall, we've got regional youth engagement hubs. So every region since 2017 has had a regional youth engagement hub. Those numbers that there on the screen are the outcomes from last year from the hubs. These hubs work with multiple agencies, at least 10 government departments in their regions, to identify young people that may need their support. And they also work across all of the schools within the regions to identify young people that may have left early without a clear transition plan. And they case manage those young people, connect with them, and work to find out what the education, training or employment pathway is that would best suit them and help them to get there. So it's an amazing program, and we've got a lot of dedicated workers across the state that work within these hubs. They're doing great things. And then our newest initiative is Link and Launch. So this is for Year 12 completers who don't go on to achieve success, which is potentially more important than ever in the post-COVID landscape, as the economy makes it more challenging for our young people. This initiative is currently located in those schools. They're based at those schools. They work alongside the school as opposed to being embedded within it. And we've got additional schools coming on board. These schools have the site there, the Link and Launch site there, which works with young people to help them navigate if they need to help developing a resume, if they need help connecting with services, if they need help understanding what their Centrelink entitlements are, if they need help to identify a training pathway, whatever it happens to be, that's what those services are there to provide to those Year 12 completers. Yeah, that's my time. Back to you, Siavash.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Greatly appreciate that. As we are speaking, I'm just uploading those 3 presentations. I think 2 of them have gone up already. The 3rd one's uploading to the comment sections. So you can either download it from there, or I'll put a link on our website where it says Youth Sector Forums on our front page. So now it's the time to basically pose any questions to our 3 speakers. So can I just put on anyone either physically raise your hand or use the Zoom raising hand if you've got a question? And I think Kylie and Nicole are going to help me make sure that we're not missing anyone. Okay, Cheryl, please go ahead, Cheryl. You have a question. Please unmute yourself. Yep.
Yes, I'm just unmuting. Thank you for the 3 ladies who've given their pretty excellent presentations. For Michelle, at the beginning you said that there was some positive online engagement with students, and I'm just wondering, do you have the percentage of those who engaged positively compared to those who didn't?
It was probably, depending on the schools, it was very different. So in my role nationally, like somewhere like Mount Isa, there was 0 engagement online at all. And then more of the metropolitan schools probably had a higher engagement. So to do a percentage overall would probably not be very accurate. But I think what we did sort of see is that, you know, roughly around 5 young people in the majority of schools felt that the online learning or remote learning suited them better due to their being carers or their mental health concerns. So that's where I think, you know, in our school like Melbourne, where we've got 400 young people in that flexi, it was a much higher percentage. So I think what was good about it is it just gave them a different way of learning for the first time that suited them better. But yeah.
And just another comment about the data collection that you're using. I'm semi-retired and I'm working part-time as an Indigenous academic mentor at USC, and we have been using a similar kind of form and have found it very useful for data collection. That's it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So next question from Janine. Janine, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi. Well, in a way, this relates to both Michelle and Marnee. We've been working with Michelle as a trial free university program. So I noted in your slides, you were talking about the importance of community building, food, all those type of things, collaboration and flexibility as being important for students. And with our particular program, as we said, it's a free university program. But what I was wondering about that was, when we're looking, for us who are designing the program to fit in with youth who've come from disadvantaged backgrounds, there's a part of university where, with assessment and things around that can't be avoided. I wouldn't mind hearing some suggestions around how a program would help students transitioning into a mainstream university. We from the mainstream, but as you know, the program isn't run exactly like mainstream. What would you suggest?
Janine, was that at myself and also who else?
Oh, Marnee.
Marnee.
Or anyone, but I mean, yeah. Michelle, you know what we've been doing with the program.
Yeah, I do. So Marnee, did you want to go first?
No, because I'm not really familiar with the program.
Okay, cool. All right. So I guess for us, I guess that building block between young people being able to successfully go from, like, the program that we did with ACU, the Clementine program for youth, was a really positive step. We had 6 young people from various flexis in Brisbane engaged with that program. And, you know, having mentors was a really important part of that. So the way that the program was set up with ACU and Janine was that the young person had a mentor to work one-on-one with them during that program. But I guess to answer your question, what would help them as a building block around assessment?
Well, given that mainstream, you don't have much, you know, it's not a very flexible and mainstream. So
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think the good thing about university assessment is a lot of it is assignments, and our young people are quite good in us creating frameworks where we're breaking and chunking things down into small achievable tasks. Where we are struggling, and I don't have an answer to this, is, you know, the essential maths and essential English. A lot of our young people haven't done so well in completing the exams. Because obviously that anxiety is still over exam. So there's still some work for us to do around that. I'd love it if anyone else had an answer to that. But, you know, I think it's just continually trying to engage young people in really rich learning tasks from the moment they come to us to their transition from us. I guess that's probably the answer.
Yeah, because I was really interested in also the stop and think philosophy you had. Was that you with the curriculum?
Yeah, it was. And that philosophy. Yeah, so that was something that I have been thinking a lot about lately, and it's come under that sort of that human capabilities. And I think it's around what disposition do we want learners to be. So originally in flexis, because young people we thought were really transient, we gave them a lot of worksheets because we thought, oh no, if they're not there tomorrow, they'll be able to catch up. But really what we missed in that is we missed the richness of actually teaching them the robust inquiry learning process. So, you know, instead of us going in and running classes like, would you rather carry 10 bars of soap or 10 towels, and then teaching maths around that, so that's what I mean by stop and think type curriculum. So I think in our schools, we need to rethink what we're doing, because we really have come from that model of, we'll do everything will be workbooks because they're so transient, they won't be here, and then they'll be able to catch up. Where we need to do that project-based learning where young people can come in and be inquiry, and that's what I mean by that stop and think. We don't have to be the deliverers of all the information. We just have to set up some really good scenarios and questions, and then young people will come up with some amazing questions. So with that soap and towel scenario, you know, the towel's wet or dry, is the soap slippery, like how big is a towel, how do we do volume? So that's what I mean. I think our schools need to think about how we can do more of that curriculum.
And I think one of the things that came up too, and there was a bit of skepticism in some areas about whether students from flexi schools could do that, was using the Socratic dialogue. They loved discussion and they were just as dynamic in their thinking as anyone at university with the ideas they were dealing with. It was really, really interesting. So, yeah. Okay.
Thank you for that. I've got a question that was sent to us earlier by Lisa Page, who's the head of the school at the YMCA Vocational School. So I'll put this to all three speakers. And the question is, with non-state school accreditation board pushing special assistance schools to add more curriculum to their offerings in order to maintain registration, how do we still engage our young people? They're pushing us into a path of as much learning as mainstream, which clearly has not worked for our young people. How do special assistance schools address this and maintain engagement while having to pressure to deliver Australian curriculum assessment and reporting authority curriculum? Any one of you three speakers want to talk about the push on flexi schools, alternative schools to pick up more and more mainstream curriculum and deliver or compete in the, I guess, with the mainstream?
I can't speak on behalf of NASAB. They're an independent board, and I'm not really familiar with the pressures that are being referred to. Others might be able to talk a little bit more about that. I guess there's a couple of points though, that I'm just trying to clarify and grapple with from the question. Around those that are up to year 10, the Australian curriculum has always been in the legislation and there's always been that expectation. So the Australian curriculum beyond year 10 isn't, so I'm not sure about the context of the question. But I think there's also a question which is about what Michelle was talking about before around it's about delivery of what we're providing to these young people. It's not necessarily about what the curriculum expectations are, but it's coming up with creative ways to deliver it. That was Michelle's last comments around that. I thought were right on the money.
Marnee and Michelle, either of you want to make any comments on that question that I posed on behalf of Lisa?
Marnee, you want to go first?
I'm happy to. It'll be short
Yep.
and sweet, but the research is certainly supporting exactly what Lisa just said and what Michelle said earlier in her presentation, is that it's not necessary. We do need rigor. The research hasn't really explored what that looks like yet fully, but what we do know is that the flexi schools are incredibly successful in re-engaging young people through doing things differently and through those key areas. So, you know, focusing on young people, centering their voices, aspirations, a focus on relationality and a focus on community.
Right.
And I just want to add, you know, yes, there has been a push from NASAB and it's no longer a review, it's now a compliance standard that we're meeting. But a lot of that curriculum stuff has always been there. I would agree with Lisa. It's about how we shape it. So again, as I sort of said in the presentation, start with what sort of young people you want to have graduating and what dispositions as learners you want. And then you have to take all those frameworks, the general capabilities, and back map it pretty much. And project-based learning allows us to do that. So we've always been able to have to show that our young people can obtain a QC. We've never had to show that we can do an ATAR. But the thing that we're really exploring right now is around human capabilities. And what are the things that we're actually doing in our schools that, you know, so it might be an immersion, or it might be that young people are running morning meetings, or it's the work experience that they're doing, which, you know, how can we sort of stop and think about what are we currently doing and what are the skills that young people are actually showing us day in, day out that we're not capturing and we're not measuring. And I think, and how do we create a rich learner profile, which I think is what really NASAB's about. It's really around, are we preparing our young people for success beyond being in our flexis?
Thanks, Michelle. And I just wanted to just make a note that we heard recently that Finland, as you all know, it's one of the leaders in education in the world. They've just actually got rid of school subjects altogether. So there's no curriculum at all. So we got a long way to go to catch up with the leaders in the world education. But now I've got another question from Cheryl, but Cheryl has had one go. So is there anybody else that wants to ask a question before I pass it on to Cheryl? No, while you're thinking, I'll go to Cheryl then. Cheryl, go ahead.
Okay, so that project-based learning, I think, is absolute key. And it goes back to pre-Aryan needs-based learning. And when I first started out in education as a literacy tutor, you focus in on what the kids are interested in and do a project on that. When I did homeschooling with my son, I only did it for a few months. We were in the Blue Mountains, and we looked at bowerbirds. We went out and tromped through the bush and found bowerbirds. And I think in flexi schools, kids are interested in certain things, and you can have a template which will key into the Australian curriculum and will allow and acknowledges the level of literacy and numeracy they're at. And we did that way back at the beginning of the 200s with the new basics. It was a brilliant template for learning, for a 3-year template for learning for kids from right down in early learning all the way through to the year 9. And I think that is the way to go. And it is possible to do it, and you actually can resurrect those templates. They had real learning objectives, and people worked across the curriculum. Anyway, that's my input.
Good point. Thanks very much, Cheryl. Any questions? Any more comments? Questions? Anyone?
Sasha here from Reconnect program. Not sure if anyone knows of Reconnect. We work with young people who are at risk of homelessness or who are homeless. We do a lot of work across my region, which is from Inala out to Lockyer Valley. But one of the biggest issues that we encounter, particularly around young people, both in mainstream and flexi, is accessing the young people in schools. You know, obviously a lot of our referrals are around young people who are experiencing family violence, family conflict. And so obviously it's not at all appropriate for us to conduct initial assessments or meet the young people at home, particularly where there are safety concerns. But the biggest barrier that we encounter are every school having their own process or set of rules around service providers being able to come in. The barriers of schools trying to handle those issues in-house and then leaving it till it gets so far at crisis level to then ask a service provider to become involved. It's frustrating and it's very disappointing because we all have the same goal in mind. Is there a baseline policy that can be utilised around allowing services to work with young people? I mean, we all have the same goal in mind, but particularly even with mainstream state education schools, it's a minefield to navigate. We've got one school in Lockyer Valley that just will not let us even step foot on campus. They won't let any services come in. There's a couple here in Ipswich that are the same. And as you all attested to in your presentations, until we address those external stresses, how can a young person engage?
Great question, Sasha. Any of our speakers want to respond to that?
I can only talk on behalf of the flexis, and I'd like to talk to you later if you feel that in any way, shape or form that's happening in any of the flexi schools, because that certainly wouldn't be our policy. We encourage lots of different agencies to come in and work with young people. Certainly, obviously, child protection and safeguarding standards would be the baseline from our point of view. And as long as people have blue cards and we're registered and all the rest of it, and you have the right sign-in protocols, that would be the only consideration we would have. from our end.
Thanks, Michelle. Sasha, as far as I know, people can correct me, is that it's an issue that it's school by school. So the principals of each school have that authority. And so I guess the best opportunity we've had ever in Queensland is that implementation of Youth Support Coordinator program. Which in my view was even better when it was placed in the community rather than in schools, and sort of, so it broke that sort of barriers between the community and school. But the saying used to be around Queensland that it was easier to get into a school, a state school, as a drug dealer as opposed to a youth worker, and that was. But there is some sort of a hesitation about allowing youth workers, and it is really, I think it's based on trying to build relationships. And I know some of those youth support workers and some of the agencies that I guess employ them have managed to do really well. So up the road from you, I know the Ipswich, the integrated youth service there. So I think they've done quite well in terms of breaking some of those barriers and getting into schools. So yeah, but I don't know if anyone else wants to make comment.
Yep, it's Kate from Education Queensland here. Sasha, if you want to get in touch with me offline, I'm more than happy to see if I can help you. The other thing you could do would be to actually utilise those generic inboxes for the Youth Hub. Actually send a message through that you'd like to talk to somebody about some of the barriers that you've got about actually accessing some of those schools. But yeah, I'm happy to chat with you offline if you like.
Great, that would be awesome. Thank you.
No worries, Sasha.
Fantastic.
I'll send you a message.
And I think, Sasha, you're also hitting the unfortunate COVID year as well, where getting into schools for everyone is a little bit tricky this year, we know. So, even if it's not a solution for right now, building those relationships for once things open up a little bit more will be helpful.
Question,
Sasha. Oh,
so I just had a question in the comment box from Steve Forward. Steve, do you want to talk to it, or should I read your question? Okay, go ahead, read it. Okay. Steve's interested in where the 11 human capabilities that Michelle talked about come from. Are they based on a source, or have any, or have they been developed from the experience of the team's programs?
There's actually 14 human capabilities, and they come from what's called Human Capabilities Framework. And I can send that document to you, Sivad, to send out to everyone, if you like. So yeah, and we sort of are doing a project with Chris from Skips, actually, where we've actually chosen 6 human capability skills to focus on with our young people in our Queensland schools.
Thanks, Michelle. Yes, send it and I'll share that. Okay, Ellie from QPAST, can you please go ahead with your question?
Thanks, dear Vash. I think this question mainly is for Lisa, but it may apply across the board. But I'm just really wondering about what the future of the youth engagement project is, because a lot of the chat that's going on, and particularly Michelle outlining the project based in self-directed learning, Siavash mentioning how Finland's moving forward, you know, a lot of the conversation is based on supporting students to stay in school. And I'm just wondering, is that the place where they need to be in its current context? We spoke about using different curriculums. Cheryl mentioned the New Basics project. I'm just wondering what the focus is. We look at the data on getting the numbers of young people who are disengaged. You know, are we talking to the young people in the system who are turning up every day who aren't actually engaged? And we work a lot with young people from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds, and that's a whole different context. But you know, they're going every day because that's what they think they need to do. Does the system work for them? Predominantly, no. So I'm just really wondering what the future of the Youth Engagement Project is. Lincoln launches a brilliant initiative, but a lot of this is sort of adding to what currently exists rather than looking at how do we dismantle and rebuild the system so it actually works for young people so they want to be there.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for the question. And around the future of the project, well, you know, I really hope there is one. We've had government make a commitment to continuing the youth engagement project with this term of government, so that's at least given us some assurance but up until that point, we were only there till 2022. So working out the future beyond 2022 is something that we can now do, thanks to government making that commitment. Around, where we're headed, there's a piece of work that's been happening for quite some time, looking at what are the practice insights, what are the practices of high performing mainstream schools where they're both keeping their young people engaged as well as achieving academic outcomes for young people. We know that straddling both of those intents is a difficult thing to do, and so we've been looking at that for quite some time. Right now, this very minute, we've got ASA, the Australian Council for Educational Research, working through those practices and aligning it to the NSIT, so that we'll have a whole suite of elaborations on what practices against the NSIT look like that within mainstream schools keep young people engaged in every classroom every day. And we'll now have opportunity to work through how that looks in terms of implementation and making schools have access to that. We know that engagement is a very long continuum, and it goes from young people having those fleeting thoughts of disengaging right through to those that are at the very pointy end that have struggled to be engaged from day one and have potentially disastrous family circumstances and personal challenges that make school a near impossibility. We understand that continuum, and we know that while mainstream schools are the place for the majority of young people, there are some that will always struggle to be in mainstream settings, and that we need to have other places that can support and provide those young people with the education bespoke to their needs. So in terms of the future of the project, we're hoping that it's supporting that entire continuum, both within mainstream settings right through to those in the alternative settings. Does that answer your question, Ellie?
Yeah, I acknowledge it's oh, sorry. I acknowledge it's quite a huge question. So yeah, definitely aspects of it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I know that the COVID-19 has raised concern amongst a lot of youth workers that there's been an increase in disengagement. And we just recently heard of an initiative in Victoria where the Victorian government are going to provide free tutoring for young people next year for all students. So I'm just wondering whether Queensland can do something like that to again, because there is, as well as all the other issues to do with disengagement, a lot of students are now feeling the stress of actually being left behind educationally, and that's one of the reasons they're having, I guess, stress and also disengaging. So, alternative education back into, okay, Ben has got a question saying, how have you found re-engaging young people from alternative education back into mainstream? Anyone wants to talk about sort of transitioning once the young people are in alternative education, of transitioning back into mainstream schooling?
The percentage, I'll probably address it. The percentage of that is probably not as high as what we would like that to be. And there's a number of reasons for that. Sometimes young people have got some aspirations, career-wise, that they feel like they can't be met. So I've had a couple of young people that sort of went back into mainstream schools because they wanted to be teachers, and we weren't teaching the whole suite of maths and science. They needed to do that. So we recommended that. Some will go back because they think they're quite ready in terms of their learning and also their mental health. If they do go back, the percentage of success rate is mixed, if I'm honest. But I guess the thing is with transitioning is I think as a flexi school, you've got to support them. So where we've had success is when we continue to work with that young person, allow them to come back into our space, check in with them on their well-being. So we take that journey with them. So we even go to the point where now we would actually go to the interview with that young person, and we would help support them financially, because sometimes there would be some initial costs with uniforms and things like that that might prohibit a young person from re-engaging. So it is hit and miss. I was really lucky in D-Bay. We had a great relationship with D-Bay High, where our young people could engage in some of their certs without necessarily being a full-time student. So that was a good way. We found we had good success when we could tap into some particular areas of interest with the young people and get them to re-engage that way.
That's great, Michelle. Thank you. I've got another question from Lindsay, who's asking, and I'm assuming that's in regards to flexi school setting. Question is, as well as vulnerable, disengaged youth, is there capacity, and do individuals with disabilities have access to these schools? Obviously, these individuals are also classed as vulnerable youth. So I'm just taking it that that's in regards to the alternative flexi schools. So Michelle, anyone wants to respond to whether young people with disabilities are particularly seen as vulnerable in that context, and the school, the alternative schools catering for them?
Absolutely. And look, it depends on the young person, whether or not we're the right fit for the young person, and the young person's the right fit for school. So, we've had young people that have got physical impairments, visual impairments, obviously mental health. Most of our schools, around 85% of them would count on NCCD. I know at D-Bay we had 44 students that had students with disabilities, mainly around ASD, speech language, but we have had physical and visual as well. So it just depends on if we think we can cater for the young person. Our schools are definitely open. We are special assistance schools. So where it's tricky is sometimes young people with ID, intellectual disabilities, that sometimes is tricky if we don't think they've got the capacity to keep them safe. Because remember, we're dealing with young people that can be anywhere from 12 to 24. So at the end of the day, the safety of every single young person is our priority. So we look at that first and foremost. But if we think that young person, we can keep them safe and we can work with them and they can work with us, then absolutely, we're open to working with anyone.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, we're out of time, and I think if there's any more questions, comments, I'll encourage you to email them to us, and we will forward it to the speakers. We'll try to answer it ourselves. I did leave those links to the PowerPoints in the comment box, but again, they will be available, as well as hopefully the recording of this session very shortly on our website as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, Lisa, Marnee, particularly for giving your time, and for all of you for participating today, and have a good rest of the day, and hopefully we'll catch you at the next forum. Thanks all.